Hi class, this is Dr. Kaufman and I'm presenting for you the Week 8 lecture on Chapter 16 and 17 of the Theories textbook in the Counseling Theories course at Grand Canyon University. This video is going to cover the mindfulness-based approaches to counseling, including acceptance commitment therapy and dialectical behavior therapy. And then there will be one more video after that, which covers the wrap-up for all of our theories we've learned about in the course from our 8 weeks working together. Let's go ahead and get started. So chapter 16, like I said, is on mindfulness-based theories. And mindfulness is a very important approach to counseling because, one, it's modern. This is not a theory that I got to learn about in my theories course when I was in grad school. So this is something that we've noticed as a field is very helpful and useful. It draws on some spiritual and meditation kind of concepts, some religion, some prayer, some meditation, some Zen, Buddhism, Taoist philosophies, and it takes some of those important ideas about how to help our mind relax and let things go instead of becoming over anxious and focused on how little control we have. And then that can help with a lot of different psychological conditions that we treat as professional mental health counselors. I want to draw your attention to the top right image on this slide because this sums it up completely. I was doing counseling with a young girl and her mom. Probably the girl was 5 years old and the mom was bringing her in because of behavior concerns in the beginning of elementary school. And I showed this picture to both and I asked them to tell me what they saw. And the mom said that the adult has too much on their mind. And the girl said something that even I had never thought of before. This 5-year-old girl said, "The kid is seeing everything the way it is." And for me, as a counselor trying to help people to manage their behaviors and use that cognitive behavioral approach about what's your automatic thought, what are your alternate behaviors, what's the outcome, I had never looked at this image and seen that. I just saw that the adult had too much on their mind and the child had less. But my attention was drawn to the child is seeing the exact same flowers that are in the picture, the exact same sun. The child is seeing the setting that the people are in and not worrying about what it is or what it isn't. And for me, that's when mindfulness really shot off as something I need to begin to understand as a mental health counselor a little bit better. And from a child, how wonderful the mind of a child is, right? So let's go ahead and see what else happens when we start opening our mind to mindfulness. Of course, I'm going to bring in Yoda. In fact, almost everything Yoda says to Luke Skywalker in The Empire Strikes back from that movie in 1980, actually clicks in with our counseling approach to mindfulness. It's amazing. I've included some cartoonified versions of those quotes here. And this is actually what we're training our clients to do, is to stay calm, at peace, passive, let our reality come to us. Train yourself to let go of whatever you're so worried about losing. What will your life really look like if you don't have that thing? And this is actually a coloring worksheet that I have for my children that I do counseling with. And it's a way to practice releasing all that worry in our mind, and we get to color Yoda. So I hope that you can see that even though I am making references to some movies that I care about very deeply, remember my dissertation is on a Star Wars video game and the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. And so I have seen counseling as being hand in hand with this franchise for many years of my life. But I'm using it to teach my clients something that they'll remember. And I hope that throughout the 8 weeks of this course, I'm using it to teach my students something that you will remember. So mindfulness started out in cognitive behavioral therapy, and then it added in some principles from Christianity and Zen Buddhism. And then we have these two new approaches to helping people with different concerns: acceptance commitment therapy and dialectical behavior therapy. So to start, we're going to talk about ACT, Acceptance Commitment Therapy. And this is from Stephen Hayes, one of the developers of this model. The goal of healthy living is not so much to feel good, but rather to feel good. Switching the emphasis changes everything. And if you don't quite understand what I'm saying, I encourage you to pause this video and think about what that means about all the goals that we're trying to form with our clients. That life is not always going to feel comfortable and good and blissful and triumphant. If they think that doing 10 counseling sessions with any of us is going to cause all disappointment in life to evaporate and never return, they have the wrong goal. And mindfulness is saying that the goal here is for us to learn how to feel our feelings accurately. When a bad thing happens to us and the emotion we get is one that feels bad, nothing is broken within us at all. Our mind, our emotions, the parietal lobe, the frontal lobe, the limbic system, all of those things are functioning exactly like we are programmed to work. And so sometimes it's the way we interface with our environment that's the problem, and our expectation that everything is going to be smooth sailing all the time, all happiness, all pleasure, all fun, and never difficult tenseness, pressure, difficulty. If we can't handle those things, we won't get to the point where we feel the triumph or the relaxation, the fun. And so that's what this theory is trying to push us towards and push our clients towards. So acceptance commitment therapy has some central constructs. It focuses on being able to identify the present, and instead of worrying about what should be or what isn't, think about some of the things we talked about in REBT and cognitive behavior therapy. It's about accepting what is, and how do I work with this? How do I commit to working through my values to having a change occur? This slide has a depth of concepts for you to integrate into your counseling approach, even if you don't think this is the kind of counselor you're going to be. If you can do CBT, but with some of these, you're going to be more effective. If you can do existential therapy with some of these, you're going to be more effective. I encourage you to please pause this slide and take some time to look at these and cross-check them with your textbook and make sure you understand what all of these things are. That we'll be able to know the truth of our reality when we're calm and at peace, passive, right? And we don't achieve mindfulness when we're always in a hurry and always in a rush and always worried about what isn't done yet. And so in a lot of ways, graduate school is the opposite of mindfulness, right? Deadlines, 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 papers, papers, papers. However, the worry doesn't help the papers get done any quicker. And I think that's what acceptance commitment therapy is trying to teach us. Another thing to realize is suffering is universal to the human condition. Whether you have a Christian faith system or you're just aware of the myths of literature, the earliest stories we have are about humanity letting down the gods and falling from perfection, falling from grace. And since that moment, the condition of life is to aim to triumph in the midst of constant suffering. And so mindfulness psychology takes this idea and encourages us to find a way to still have meaning and to be productive in the midst of all that difficulty. And some people find this in their profession, some people find this in their faith system, some people find this in their family and friends or a hobby that they're truly passionate about. But the whole point is to find meaning and productivity and to have a context for your own life. One that isn't just accepting of only the suffering and living in this place where you're constantly upset about your situation. The context needs to be a functional one that lets you to operate within your life system, accept what is, stay true to your values, and calmly and patiently work towards what isn't, but what is realistically possible. Another thing to remember is the concept of psychological flexibility when we are focused on our present instead of the fear of losing something in the future. We're able to operate in the present. We're able to take the things that are happening to us, bend our expectations around so it still matches the situation, and be effective in our environment. So a healthy style of thinking is separate from just what we want. A healthy way of thinking is flexible enough to accept the reality. And when we take the things that we're thinking initially as truth, but they're not flexible, we experience dysfunction. But if we have a flexible mental world, then truth can become what is being presented to us, or it can become relative. It can become something that is not persecuting me in this moment. And that is how you maintain a healthy commitment to your action, a healthy connection to your values, and a healthy acceptance of what actually is in the moment of now. So another thing to remember is that we can use questions to help understand where the mindfulness world of our client is and where that flexibility lies, or where the strain on that flexibility begins. This image here, if you'd like to pause it and maybe zoom in the video or full screen it, you can see that there are questions we ask on the acceptance and action questionnaire, which is listed in the textbook, and you're able to figure out on a 7-point Likert scale how flexible or what the connection the client has to the concept of truth really is. And that helps us to get some ideas about where the adjustment and where improving the flexibility could be beneficial for the client. When we're in the counseling room with them, we want them to feel that warmth and genuineness, and that we're actually caringly exploring who they are as a person in the midst of their world. But we also want to be seen as someone who can pass on some of these skills and help them to begin mastering what they're learning from us. And we can model the mindfulness philosophy to the client. Another thing to remember is that we are just witnessing what they are presenting to us, and we're trying to model the flexibility that we are passing on through our cognitions and working with them. The goal is for the client to be more willing to accept their present, and for their values to not be challenged just when a disappointing circumstance arises. And if they can do that, then now they're operating with some of those central constructs: their presence, their values, their flexibility, their mindfulness. And that gives them a better opportunity to select choices that they can live more easily with and feel more secure in as they make those choices. Another thing to remember is ACT is an acronym. So you accept your surroundings, you choose your decision based on your value system and available resources, and then you go into take action mode. ACT, acceptance, commitment, therapy. Accept, choose, take action. And when we are afraid of losing something in the future or in our present even, we lose the balance, we lose our flexibility, and we start to panic and we start to make rash choices. So it's important to accept the circumstance first. We can't operate from a place of what should be. We can only operate from a place of what is. Another thing that we can use is metaphor in mindfulness. Metaphors connect with the psychological world of the mind in a wonderful way. We are passengers on a bus. We're not driving. And when we get to certain destinations, we can decide whether to get off or to stay on. We can decide whether to communicate with people on the bus or not. And that is sort of the way life is framed in the mindfulness context, is what can we ultimately do in the situation we're in. Also, the willingness dial on a scale of 1 to 100. How willing are you to make a certain decision? What would it take to make you more willing? What would have to happen for you to be less willing? This is a really good way, sort of like how scaling questions work in solution-focused counseling, to get the client to understand that they have agency in their situation and that it's their choice whether to accept their surroundings or reject them and stay entrapped by them. And if we can give the client an opportunity to see through that window and see how their values are operating and seeing how tense they get in certain circumstances, then they get to understand what willingness really is, to accept, choose, and take action. And that brings us to dialectical behavior therapy, which is the approach of Marsha Linehan, and it was developed to help treat borderline personality disorder. And borderline personality disorder is one of the toughest problems to assist clients with because they have very erratic emotional life worlds in their mind, that they can have a good session with you and now suddenly you are the best counselor that's ever walked this earth. And they could be held accountable and told a truth that they do not accept willingly. And now you are the worst counselor ever. I'm going to sue you for malpractice. You should never have had your license. And you've wasted all these months of my life and you're ruining people's lives. And that can happen in the span of 2 different sessions, a couple days, a week. It really depends how stable their internal world is at the time. And also, when a problem relationally happens, whether it's with a counselor, a friend, or a family member, a borderline personality person with that disorder is going to frequently threaten self-harm or even suicide. It's a way to actually maintain the spotlight and the emotional focus of that relationship. It's manipulative, but I wouldn't say the goal is exactly manipulation because for them, this is their natural response. This is a personality disorder. They may not realize all of this is happening, but their entire self-world is healthy or unhealthy based on the feelings being received from other people and the attention being received from other people. Ultimately, the internal world is very empty, dramatic, and also quite helpless to initiate their own change because it's so externally reliant. And so this approach is designed to help shift that reliance into the internal world and begin generating better self-feedback for the person so they don't have these erratic, rash reactions to the things that are happening around them to them. So the goal here is to form a dialectic, which is a standpoint with a holistic understanding of the person. We want to help the person understand better the opposing forces in their life. That someone can disagree with them about a small thing, but still ultimately believe they are a great and wonderful person. Instead of the whole identity of the person always being on trial with these acceptances and these rejections from others. And so first you want to accept through mindfulness concepts that I am not perfect and other people do not need to encourage me to be perfect or validate that I'm perfect. That need for validation is part of the root of the problem. And also to form some distress tolerance, that it's okay for certain problems to linger. It's okay for certain disagreements to remain unresolved at the end of this specific conversation. And then through the process of changing, we want to help from distress tolerance start impacting the methods of interacting with other people, and then to regulate the emotion that I don't have to wholly reject a person just because we had a disagreement or just because they didn't want to do this thing alongside me over the evening or the weekend. That a healthy emotional regulation leads to adaptive behavior rather than this extreme acceptance and rejection that they are accustomed to feeling from earlier stages in their life that have formed their personality development. Another thing to remember is when you lack mindfulness in your world, every discomfort is a catastrophe. When you lack distress tolerance, every catastrophe goes from a scale of urgent level 4 to catastrophe level 10. And when the moods and emotions are either the happiest I've ever felt or the most devastating I've ever felt, and there's no middle ground, you have a pendulum of emotion that is just swinging fast and intensely, and it's hard to have a stable emotional life and connection with other people. So what we're trying to pass on through counseling is to help the client understand that these things are happening in them, that these things are happening for a reason. A lot of time, childhood experiences are so key for understanding how a person came to be. I ask myself with every new client I meet, what would likely have had to happen for the client to appear this way to me today? And when I ask that question, after that first assessment, they've left the room and I'm wrapping up my work with their chart that day, trying to figure out how am I going to counsel this person. I'm doing that so that I can try to look past the pathology and look past the intense emotion and the impulsiveness and the lack of distress tolerance and the unstable mindful world and see them still as a person that things happen to. No one is really born just with borderline personality disorder. This is the byproduct of connections with other people being formed a certain way and maintained a certain way. And it's really important for us to consider how we're going to still be a helpful counselor and not just trigger those rejection mechanisms, but to trigger the empathy and supportive reaction centers of their core world. And if we can do that by still seeing them as a person with these intense reactions to things, then we have a chance to do effective dialectical behavior therapy or just effective therapy in general. That doesn't mean it's easy, though. So when you are healthy and you don't necessarily have borderline personality disorder, then you have some vulnerabilities to emotions. It's not fun to feel sad. It's not fun to feel rejected, but you're able to regulate yourself. You're able to not react rashly. You're not going to find yourself submarining a relationship that has been a stable part of your life for years over one disagreement. What I mean is just plunging it into the depths and blowing it up. You can walk away from a disagreement without that harsh reaction. When you have a dysfunction in your mind, according to dialectical behavior therapy, the way your emotions interact and connect you to other people, you're vulnerable to an environment that is eager to reject you. And even though that may not necessarily be true, that's the truth inside the person's own reality. And that candidate is a good candidate for doing DBT work in the counseling session. What I have here is a diary card, and diary cards can be really useful. Think like a thought record from CBT, but this is more focused on the types of problems that dialectical behavior therapy are focused on working on. So when we're doing our assessment, we're going to be doing an interview to identify if this is a candidate with borderline personality. We're going to identify the primary and secondary targets in their life. And then we're going to track the progress using diary cards. So you see a list of urges and a list of drug usages, a list of emotions and skill usages, and then effective behaviors that they can list for themselves in some of those blanks. And a bunch of different ways to rate them from day to day, and also to write a narrative themselves, sort of like a small rectangle box where you do somewhat of a journal entry. And so this is something that we can pass on and utilize frequently every counseling session with our client. And then we can have a matter-of-fact discussion of what is being explained that is consistent with a emotionally regulated life and what is more of an outrageous attitude, and start to practice having a more moderate attitude about some of those situations. So we want the intense emotions to become more flexible and accepting emotions of the self, to trust the self to be able to handle the situation instead of the fear that generates the intense reaction that I'm not good enough. So, in the process of therapy, we're going to address the life-threatening behavior, help the client experience those emotions, make a stronger and flexible connection with the world where I respect myself and believe that I'm capable of managing this. And then we'll address any leftover feelings of incompleteness. And we do this in a cycle, sort of. We can continue to address these things, and over time, maybe we don't need the first step anymore. Maybe we don't need the first 2 steps anymore. And then maybe the person is accepting a more adjusted measure of interacting with their environment, in their world, and in their emotional life. So we want to be able to help the client see themselves in terms of their behavior, their emotional life, their social interactions, and who they are, the self that they have built for understanding their own world. So the techniques that we use are the core mindfulness skills that I talked about from Hayes' theory of mindfulness, acceptance, commitment therapy. We also want to work with them on distress tolerance. Do I have to respond to this like it's a 10? Is a 4 or a 5 something that would be more reasonable here? What would that look like? Let's practice that conversation. And then we want to help them regulate their emotions better and identify moments when the emotions did get out of hand somewhat and the reaction was harsh and extreme. We want to validate the progress they're making. That's going to help them because they want to hear that they're being accepted by the people in their life, and the counselor taking the time to validate can go a long way in building that rapport and that therapeutic alliance. And then we want to problem solve with them so that they can feel secure in the conclusions from the treatment that this is something that's likely to work. Another thing that we can pass on is there are mood meter apps that you can use to check in during your day, pick a color, and start to understand what feeling that is. And that's a way for people who are more technologically minded or want some feedback or data for themselves to see how they're experiencing their day. If you don't want to go with the mood meter app, you can still do things like this during counseling. You can do tracking worksheets for emotions. You can do check-ins at the beginning of the therapy session. And so any kind of feedback and any kind of tracking can give the person an understanding of who they are over time, that these extreme feelings are consistent. And then what can we do about them? Because what does that do to your life, your relationship life, your work life, your family life, your life where you're trying to engage in fun and relaxation? And then would the more moderate and tempered sort of emotional connections to those experiences be more agreeable for you? And then if we have the data, we can show them, we can clearly see the truth of the situation, that it's not my opinion anymore, and it's not the client's opinion of themselves, that it's data, it's feedback. And some people find a lot of comfort in looking at their life that way. So we want to emphasize that the client's values are important, that their life is worth living, and that their values are, even if their values seem to be causing some of the problems, that commitment to their value system is important. And we can look at how well are these helping you and how much of a problem are these causing for you. It does have a holistic emphasis. We want to look at the behaviors as well as the emotions, and as well as the psyche and the spiritual world of the person. And we want all of that to be able to connect with other people in a more healthy and functional way. One of the downsides to this is that Linehan points out that borderline personality disorder is often diagnosed to women, whereas a man with this problem might end up having to do group therapy for anger management. In fact, in medical schools around the country, one of the most often cited individuals that we all understand a lot about as a poster child for borderline personality disorder is a fictional character, and it's not a woman. It's Anakin Skywalker and his transformation into Darth Vader as depicted in the prequel trilogy of Star Wars. Once the character of Anakin started to take center stage instead of just the total villain that Darth Vader is. that medical school students learn about this disorder using a example that is a male character in fiction, but in real life, mostly women get diagnosed with this, and we miss the mark on catching what this actually looks like when demonstrated by a male client. So that's something to think about and to try and figure out for ourselves. We want to make sure we're diagnosing accurately and consistently. So to summarize, ACT and DBT are rooted in cognitive and behavioral theory, but they take the mindfulness elements from outside of psychology per se, like with Christianity and Zen Buddhism, and meditation approaches, and we put them into a psychological framework that our clients can practice and utilize to improve. We want the client to behave in a way that's consistent with their values, but has the kind of impact on their reality that they're looking for when they decide to come to treatment. And then for DBT, we want to help people regulate their intense emotions and have a more agreeable connection with other people, the ability to accept feedback and perceive it as more of feedback for the situation than a personal rejection. And then we want to have good support and good cultural understanding with the way we're using these approaches, and give people a chance to be themselves and to use these approaches in a way that matches with who they are striving to be. So the next video I do is going to be a summary wrap-up of the entire course, and I really hope you are enjoying the lecture videos so far. And that wraps up the acceptance commitment therapy lecture and the dialectical behavior therapy lecture from our textbook. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.